Hi everybody, I'm Jack from American Turn. I hope you've had a pleasant end to this week. We're in September, so we've still got Space Opera September going on, hosted by SFF 180. And one of the prompts was read a space opera novella. And The Ballad of Beta-2 by Samuel Delany was, something grabbed off the shelf and read last night and tonight. And I really enjoyed it. Delany he's a strong author who really, he does hard science fiction well. He's got interesting concepts around, space travel, around physics. Like he gets all of that. But it's not what he's particularly interested in as a writer. He's more interested in like human culture, in sociology, in language, in like how we use language and develop language, in like ideas around gender. So he's interested in all of that, but he puts in these cool little details of hard science fiction in his books and in his stories and in his, novella like Ballad of Beta-2. In a very effective way that enhances the story overall. So I really enjoyed this. I want to give a brief plot, but I don't want to spoil anything. Like legitimately don't want to spoil anything. But it's an excellent novella. It's from the 1960s, and the framing device is there's a galactic anthropologist, doctoral student, who wants to go study something, and instead he's told, well, no. You're an honor student. You think you're above this. I'm going to have you go study this like primitive, spacefaring culture. And they, I don't want to do that. I don't want. No, you're going to study it, and you're going to study the Ballad of Beta-2. That's the text you're going to study. You need to get some primary, sources on this, which means he's going to have to go to this primitive space culture. And it turns out, this is on like the third page, so I don't really consider a spoiler. It turns out that this was a group of humans who journeyed on these large, like spherical star cities, essentially space cities, that traveled for hundreds of years in a, they had essentially a culture on these space cities, these star cities, traveling because they were heading off to, colonize a new place, but they didn't have a way to travel. They don't have a hyperdrive as the modern the current technology has, and so they have had to go and like travel through deep space just with the other, like there's 12 of these ships and 10 of them make it, but of the 10, 2 have suffered cataclysms, and then there's 2 others that are totally gone. And the cultures are the culture that exists within the surviving 8 ships is regarded as like primitive and weird, and it's almost like subhuman. Like in those centuries of space travel, they really regressed and lost their humanity and civilization. But nobody really knows. And what they find out is that someone got like a robot in there to record a couple of things, one of which is the Ballad of Beta-2. And so we get, similar to a work like Pale Fire, we get this poem. Then came one to the city, over sand with her bright hair wild, with her eyes coal black and her feet so sore, and under her arms a green-eyed child. 3 men stood on the city wall, 1 was short and 2 were tall. 1 had a golden trumpet clear, that he shouted through so all would hear, that 1 had come to the city, over sand with her bright hair wild, with her eyes coal black and her feet so sore, and under her arms a green-eyed child. And, a woman stood by a market stall, the tears like diamonds on her cheek. 1 eye was blind, she could not speak, but she heard the guards of the city call out, 1 has come to the city, over sand. And it goes on. And so he's given this poem, and that's what he's supposed to study, this galactic anthropologist. And it, as he goes to interact with the remnants of the survivors from this hundreds-year journey through deep space, he finds like actual old books, like the captain's logbooks or recordings, and he begins to use those and piece together, what does it mean to have feet so sore? I'll give you a hint. Imagine that you're in space, and so you don't really experience gravity very often, and then suddenly you do experience gravity again. What does it? What is this business about the trumpet? That's answered on like in the final chapter. And so what the book involves is piecing together what all of those lyrics, what the weird imagery, what the gnomic little phrasings of this Ballad of Beta-2 signify. And the mystery is enhanced because Beta-2 is one of the 10 ships that survive, but it's a ship in which there are no survivors. It doesn't seem to have suffered, like the ship hasn't been destroyed, but there was no one alive on the ship when it eventually reached its destination. And mind you, because the humans on Earth had developed like hyperdrive, they got to that system first and had already colonized it while these spheres were going. But then you get the Delany hard science in this as well. He increased the magnification of the view screen until the spheres filled the whole wall. As he watched, another ship emerged from the cluster, and there was no difficulty in identifying it as the Sigma 9. It looked like a crushed eggshell, with a fine spider webbing of girders feathering the edges of the cracks. The main damage was indeed an enormous area missing from the hull, from which fissures radiated in all directions, a dangling fragment here and there. His first thought was that there must have been a tremendous explosion inside the ship, but reflection on the way that it had been constructed convinced him that any such explosion of a magnitude sufficient to tear out such a large section of the hull would have forced the remainder apart. Laws learned in his course in colloidal physics rule out any exterior image. It was, in fact, a completely impossible kind of wreckage, but there it hung, directly in front of him. And so you get that idea of like a ship that should have either like ripped the sphere, like it should have ripped or it should have like crushed in, and instead it doesn't seem to follow like Newtonian mechanics. So there's a whole mystery around that. And we then have this galactic anthropologist interacting with this mysterious character who, bizarrely, kind of like the poem, has green eyes and seems to be like an adolescent. But who is he? Like, also seems to violate the laws of physics. And so there's some really interesting mysteries going on in a very short and compact little 124-page novel. And it's not super fine print. So it read very smoothly. It read very quickly. You know, it pushes in some interesting ideas. There's a deep reference and imagery that becomes clear at the end. Some of the ideas around within that Ballad of Beta-2, there's a lyric around like something shaped like a skull. That's kind of a clue that of what Delany's going for, and he makes it very explicit with a quotation at the last or second to last page that makes it very clear now what, you know, story from human culture that he's referencing within this book. I don't want to spoil it, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoy space opera, and I enjoy Delany. He's an interesting writer. Last year I had read Triton by Delany, which is longer and focuses a lot more on sort of those ideas around sociology, language, gender, but again has these interesting, like on Triton there are these enormous, you know, artificial gravity generators that keep these cities on the moon Triton, and if they're turned off, what could happen on the city? What cataclysms could occur? So it's really interesting. Delany can sometimes sort of run in different directions with his mind, which I appreciate. Dhalgren is famous for doing that, which is sort of like the space opera version of Finnegan's Wake. Ballad of Beta-2, especially with the intertextuality and human, the massive illusion that it's going for, it reminds me a little bit of Roger Zelazny's fantastic short story, A Rose for Ecclesiastes, which I'll throw a link. I did a discussion around that back in, I think, April or May, and so I'll throw a link to that down in there. And like I said, the idea of taking a poem or you know, at the beginning of the text and putting it in there, and then using the story to unravel that poem reminds me a fair amount of Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, by far my favorite work by Nabokov. So yeah, this is Ballad of Beta-2 by Samuel Delany. I don't know if you've ever read any Delany. I'm curious about like sort of where other people rank some of his works, but I really enjoyed Ballad of Beta-2, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's interested in science fiction or interested in wanting to explore some other avenues of science fiction. But you know, it's 124 pages, so it's a very short exploration. But yeah, again, have a great weekend. Thank you.